In 2014, the death of the 99-year-old Mary, Duchess of Roxburghe, led her heir to a London vault and a discovery that felt frozen in time. There, tucked away in massive oak chests, he found a treasure trove of jewelry, all curiously wrapped in newspapers from a single, turbulent year, 1953. Why had these masterpieces, including rare Cartier commissions, been hidden in the dark for over half a century? Today, we are going to untangle the history of a woman who stood at the very pinnacle of British society, only to find herself defending her legacy in a castle without light or water. It is a story of unparalleled status, a public betrayal, and the magnificent jewels that survived it all. Before we begin, please support my channel by clicking on the like and subscribe buttons. Thank you. When Mary, Duchess of Roxburghe, passed away in 2014, she had lived for nearly a century. She was 99 years old, a figure from a vanished age who had quietly resided in Surrey for decades. Her estate passed to a rather surprising heir, her grandnephew, the late television presenter Bamber Gascoigne. He was already 80 when this unexpected responsibility landed on his shoulders. The bequest included West Horsley Place, the red brick country home where Mary had spent her later years. The house was historically significant, dating back to the 16th century, but it was in desperate need of extensive repairs. Mary herself had expressed that she expected Bamber to simply sell the mansion and the estate. Instead, he and his wife made a brave choice. They resolved to keep the house and undertake the massive work required to secure its future. To fund such a significant restoration, Bamber Gascoigne decided to auction many of his aunt's possessions. This decision led to a visit to a London bank vault that would uncover one of the most remarkable time capsules in recent jewelry history. Visiting the bank where the Duchess's valuables had been kept on deposit must have been an overwhelming experience. Emerging from the darkness were 4 massive oak chests, heavy with silver and objets de vertu. But for a jewelry lover, the true wonder lay in the sea of red leather cases and bespoke cream boxes from Cartier, each tooled with the initial M in a distinctive Celtic font. When the lids were lifted, observers found objects wrapped in newspaper. These weren't just old packings, they were dated 1953. For over half a century, these treasures, ropes of pearls, diamond sweets, and tiaras, had remained hidden, frozen in the exact moment the Duchess packed them away. There is a striking detail here that hints at the drama behind this collection. Amidst the luxury of the Cartier cases, one of the diamond tiaras was discovered inside a damaged, simple tin deed box. It seems startling that a woman of such immense wealth, a granddaughter of the Rothschilds, would store a masterpiece so haphazardly. The answer, and the reason for those 1953 newspapers, lies in the turbulent events of that specific year. It was a year that saw a glittering coronation, but for Mary, it also marked a personal siege and a scandalous public end to her marriage. These jewels were not just stored, they were evacuated. To understand how such a treasure trove ended up in a bank vault, wrapped in newspaper, we have to look back at the world Mary entered long before the newspapers were printed. Mary Evelyn Hungerford Crewe Milnes was born in 1915, and to say she was born into the purple of high office does not quite capture the scale of her heritage. Her background was a convergence of immense political influence and staggering wealth. Her father was Robert Crewe Milnes, the first and only Marquess of Crewe, a liberal statesman who had served as Viceroy of Ireland and Ambassador to France. Her mother, Lady Margaret Primrose, known as Peggy, was the daughter of the 5th Earl of Rosebery, a prime minister during Queen Victoria's reign. But the lineage becomes even more dazzling when we look at Mary's maternal grandmother, Hannah de Rothschild. Through her, Mary was a direct descendant of the banking dynasty and a great-granddaughter of Baron Mayer de Rothschild, the builder of Metmore Towers. The scale of her upbringing was extraordinary, even by the standards of the time. She was raised between Crewe Hall, a vast Jacobean pile in Cheshire, and Crewe House in Mayfair, one of the last great London mansions of its kind. She was named after her godmother, Queen Mary, and from her very first days, she was surrounded by beautiful possessions and the highest echelons of society. This pedigree set the stage for her marriage in 1935, an event that was widely considered one of the most fashionable society weddings of the year. Lady Mary, who was described in articles of the time as vividly beautiful, married George Innes Kerr, the 9th Duke of Roxburghe. The Duke, known to his intimates as Bobo, was just 22, a dashing young officer fresh from Sandhurst and one of the largest landowners in Scotland. The ceremony took place at Westminster Abbey in October. It was a sparkling affair, grand enough that King George V and Mary's godmother, Queen Mary, attended the service. The reception was held at Crewe House, and in a testament to the public's fascination with the match, the wedding was even screened in cinemas nationwide. It seemed like the perfect union of two great British families, solidifying Mary's ascent on the aristocratic ladder. She was born in a world where prime ministers were grandfathers and queens were godmothers. But even against this backdrop of inherited privilege, the jewelry collection she began to amass, starting with her engagement, stood out for its quality and taste. One of the first significant pieces to enter her personal collection was her engagement ring. It is a piece that tells us a great deal about the style of the era and Mary's own aesthetic. Designed by Cartier, the ring dates from the 1930s and perfectly captures Cartier's aesthetic in the early 30s. The design is set with two large pear-shaped diamonds, weighing 2.31 and 2.34 carats respectively. These primary stones are accented by two marquise-shaped diamonds, creating a silhouette that is elegant, elongated, and distinctively Art Deco. When this ring came up for auction after Mary's death, the experts at Sotheby's assigned it a conservative estimate of between £8,000 and £12,000. However, the market had a very different view. Collectors recognized the rarity of the design and the allure of the Cartier signature. A bidding war ensued, and the ring eventually sold for £167,000, almost 14 times its high estimate. It is interesting to note that while the experts looked at the carat weight, the buyers clearly saw something more. They saw the provenance and the undeniable chic of a Cartier piece from the 1930s. Cartier was a constant presence in Mary's jewelry box, marking both her entrance into the Roxburghe family and her independent life years later. The most spectacular symbol of her new status as a duchess was, of course, a tiara. Among the wedding gifts she received was a magnificent diamond diadem, also created by Cartier. This piece, dating to the 1930s, is a study in Art Deco geometry and light. It is designed as a halo of diamonds, structured with a band of circular cut stones. Surmounting this band is a graduated series of 31 collet-set diamonds, stones set in a simple rim of metal that allows them to catch the light from every angle. The design is rigorous yet brilliant. It lacks the floral sprays or scrolling foliage typical of the 19th century. Instead, it relies on the purity of the stones and the architectural balance of the setting. There is a fascinating detail regarding the versatility of this piece. The auction notes highlight that the base is detachable, but contemporary press reports from 1935 went further. One article suggested that the top row of diamonds could be detached and worn separately as a necklace, a riviere. While the auction catalog did not confirm this specific conversion, we do know that the central element of the tiara is detachable and can be worn as a brooch or clip. Mary wore this tiara for high-profile events throughout her life, including the Queen Charlotte's Ball and the Victoria League Ball in the 1950s. It was a piece that signaled her modernity and her status. When the collection was sold in 2015, this Art Deco tiara became the star of the show. It carried an estimate of roughly 300 to 500,000 Swiss francs. When the hammer finally fell, it realized over 2.4 million Swiss francs, or roughly $2.5 million. It was the most expensive of the 3 tiaras sold from her estate. At this point in her life, in the late 1930s, Mary seemed to have it all: the title, the castle, and the jewels to match. But as we look at the dazzling, brilliant-cut diamonds of this tiara, we must remember that they were destined to spend decades hidden in the dark. The brilliance of her wedding day would eventually give way to a conflict that would test Mary's resolve far more than any social engagement. The next piece in her collection speaks to something far more dramatic: almost theatrical. It is known as the Valkyrie tiara or the winged tiara, and it is undoubtedly the most unusual and arresting jewel associated with the Duchess of Roxburghe. At first glance, this headpiece seems to defy the trends of the 1930s. While her engagement ring and the previous tiara were exercises in geometric restraint, this piece is a wild, soaring tribute to Norse mythology. It is shaped as a pair of diamond wings, constructed from more than 2,500 diamonds, all set in a gold and silver frame. The design was inspired by the winged helmets worn by the heroines of Wagner's opera cycle, Der Ring des Nibelungen. The imagery of the Valkyries, the female figures who choose those who may die in battle, sparked a significant fashion trend in the late 19th century. We know that other prominent women, such as the wife of American banker J.P. Morgan Jr., owned similar winged tiaras made by Cartier around 1909. But Mary's tiara appears in the records in 1935, the year of her wedding. For a long time, the accepted story was that Mary herself commissioned Cartier to make this last Valkyrie as a homage to the fashions of her childhood. The narrative was that she had admired winged tiaras at balls as a young girl and asked the house to recreate one for her marriage into a Scottish dynasty. However, when we look closer at contemporary reports and the physical evidence of the jewel itself, a different, more complex history emerges. Newspaper reports from October 1935, covering the gifts bestowed upon the new Duchess, explicitly mention a tiara from her mother-in-law, Mary Golette, the Dowager Duchess of Roxburghe. One paper described it as striking and unusual with its imposing Mercury wings, while another noted it was shaped like two Mercury wings set in the center of a narrow diamond bandeau. This suggests that the tiara was not a brand new creation from scratch, but likely a clever adaptation. Curators later discovered that while the diamond bandeau base was indeed made by Cartier in the 1930s, the wings themselves bear the maker's mark of Oscar Masson and date back to the 1880s. It appears that the Dowager Duchess, herself a wealthy American heiress with a legendary collection, gifted these Victorian wings to her new daughter-in-law, and Cartier was tasked with mounting them onto a modern headband. The construction of the wings is a marvel of engineering. They are fitted with wire-coiled springs, a technique known as en tremblant. This means that with every slight movement of the wearer's head, the wings would tremble and shimmer, creating the illusion of feathers fluttering in the light. Furthermore, the wings could be detached from the bandeau and worn as separate brooches, offering the Duchess versatility in how she displayed her wealth. 2 years after receiving these extraordinary wedding gifts, Mary had the opportunity to display her status on the grandest stage of all. On May 12, 1937, King George VI and Queen Elizabeth were crowned at Westminster Abbey. It was a moment of supreme pageantry, and the new Duchess of Roxburghe was at the very center of it. Mary was selected to serve as one of the canopy bearers for the Queen during the anointing ceremony. This was a role of significant honor, reserved for the highest-ranking women in the peerage. In surviving illustrations of the ceremony, specifically depicting the anointing of Queen Elizabeth, we can see Mary positioned at the back of the canopy on the Queen's left side. She stood alongside the Duchesses of Rutland, Norfolk, and Buccleuch, literally upholding the dignity of the monarchy. While her role was of great public importance, no official records or photographs were ever released showing which specific jewels she chose for that day. It is tempting to think she might have worn her important diamond riviere. This mid-19th century necklace was a classic piece for the high aristocracy, featuring a flowing stream of 43 graduated collet-set diamonds. She may have paired it with the geometric Cartier tiara we've already seen, or perhaps her magnificent Victorian diamond tiara. We will examine that specific piece in detail in just a moment. At this moment, in 1937, Mary stood at the pinnacle of British society. She was young, vividly beautiful, married into a powerful dukedom, and physically supporting the Queen in the Abbey. Her life appeared to be a perfect reflection of her jewelry, glittering, structured, and elevated. But history has a way of creating sharp, painful contrasts. As Mary stood in the Abbey, holding the canopy, she could hardly have imagined that by the time of the next coronation, that of Queen Elizabeth II in 1953, her position would be radically different. The woman who stood at the heart of the monarchy's celebration would soon find herself fighting a very private battle in a very public way. For 16 years, the rhythm of Mary's life followed the grand traditions of Floors Castle, but by 1953, that rhythm had broken down completely. By 1953, the Roxburghe marriage had deteriorated from a society fairy tale into a public battleground. While the rest of Britain was preparing for the coronation of Queen Elizabeth II, Mary was entrenched in a very different kind of ceremony, a 6-week siege within her own home. The Duke of Roxburghe decided to evict the Duchess from Floors Castle, their ancestral seat in the Scottish borders. He based this astonishing course of action on the existing common law in Scotland at the time, which held that a wife lived in the marital home essentially by license of her husband. When Mary refused to leave voluntarily, the Duke escalated the situation with ruthless practicality. He ordered the electricity, gas, and telephone to her suite of rooms to be cut off. It is a situation that feels almost surreal to consider. Mary, a woman whose life had been defined by the utmost luxury, a granddaughter of the Rothschilds and a daughter of a marquess, was suddenly isolated in a wing of a 100-room palace, living without heat or light. She dug in, displaying the tenacity that would define her later years. Sympathetic neighbors, including the noted artist Lord Hague, began smuggling food, candles, matches, and paraffin lamps to her, turning the grand estate into a zone of guerrilla warfare. The standoff split the aristocratic opinion of the boarders. While the Duke of Buccleuch sided with his fellow duke, many others rallied around Mary. The conflict reached a critical point when the Duke attempted to play his final card, cutting off the water supply to the house. This would have made the castle uninhabitable. However, Mary had powerful allies. One of her neighbors was the Earl of Home, who would later become Prime Minister Alec Douglas Home. He offered Mary a piece of tactical advice that proved decisive. He suggested she inform the insurance company that if the water were cut off, the fire risk to the historic castle would skyrocket. The threat to the insurance policy worked where emotional appeals had not. The water remained on. Eventually, however, the pressure became unsustainable. The matter was settled out of court, and Mary agreed to leave Floors Castle permanently. It was in the chaos and stress of this departure that the mystery of the bank vault is solved. When Mary packed her belongings to retreat to London, she wasn't just packing clothes, she was securing her financial independence and her legacy. She took her personal property, including the magnificent jewelry collection we have been exploring. In the haste of the move, these priceless items, the Cartier tiaras, the ruby parures, the pearls, were wrapped in whatever was to hand. In 1953, that meant the daily newspapers. She placed these hastily wrapped bundles into deed boxes and oak chests and deposited them in a bank in London. The marriage was formally dissolved in December 1953, with the Duke's adultery cited as the reason. The coda to this drama was swift and somewhat cynical. Just a few weeks after the divorce was granted, the Duke married his second wife, Margaret McConnell, whose maiden name was Church. The speed of the union gave rise to a popular quip in the clubs of London and the streets of Kelso. "Where is the Duke? He's gone to church." Mary, however, did not remarry. She retreated to London and later to her family's estate in Surrey, taking comfort in her family motto, "I know whom I have believed." She kept her title, and crucially, she kept her jewels. But for many of those pieces, the light of the ballroom was replaced by the darkness of the bank vault, where they would rest, wrapped in the headlines of that difficult year, for the next 6 decades. While the Cartier pieces tell the story of Mary's marriage and her own modern taste, the contents of those vaults also included a legacy far older and heavier, the inheritance of the Rothschilds and the Roseberries. These were the jewels that spoke of the immense dynastic wealth that Mary was born into, pieces that had adorned her mother and grandmother long before she became a duchess. Among the most significant of these heirlooms was a ruby and diamond parure of truly exceptional quality. We often talk about provenance adding value to a jewel, But in this case, the raw quality of the gemstones was enough to make the market tremble. The set, comprising a necklace and matching earrings, was created by the crown jeweler, Gerard, in 1884. We actually know the exact moment these gems entered the family history thanks to the diary of Mary's grandfather, the 5th Earl of Rosebery. In an entry dated March 28, 1884, he wrote with typical aristocratic understatement, "London. Gerard came at 12 with the ruby necklace which I bought." Behind that dry, matter-of-fact line lay a purchase of breathtaking extravagance intended for his wife, Hannah de Rothschild. The necklace is a masterpiece of late 19th century design, featuring 24 cushion-shaped rubies alternating with diamonds. But it is the stones themselves that set this piece apart. They are of Burmese origin, and crucially, they show no indications of heating, a rarity in the modern world where so many gems are treated to enhance their color. These possess the highly prized pigeon's blood hue naturally. Mary actually parted with this specific set during her lifetime, sending them to auction in Geneva in November 2009. The result was staggering. The necklace alone achieved nearly $4.3 million, while the earrings brought in over $1.4 million. It was a reminder that while Mary lived a relatively quiet life in her later years, the assets she controlled were of a caliber that could rival the collections of sovereign queens. But the Rosebery rubies didn't end with the necklace and earrings. There was also a third piece to this fiery collection, a ruby and diamond diadem from the same period. This tiara is a delicate, almost ethereal piece. It's designed as a series of foliate sprays, like shimmering diamond leaves, set with cushion-shaped and rose-cut diamonds. At its heart is a lyre motif, a classical symbol that gives the piece a very distinct, poetic silhouette. What's fascinating here is that the rubies were actually a later addition. The tiara began its life as an all-diamond piece, but was later embellished with circular-cut rubies to match the rest of the parure. While the rubies belonged to the Rosebery side of her family, Mary also inherited a piece that reflected the quieter elegance of her mother, Lady Margaret. This was a Victorian diamond tiara dating to around 1890. It is a classic design of the period, far more traditional than the Valkyrie wings or the Art Deco halo. The tiara features a graduated row of 20 pear-shaped diamonds that are set to swing gently within a framework of diamond scrolls and fleur-de-lis motifs. It is the kind of kinetic, light-catching jewel that was designed to sparkle brilliantly under the gaslight of a Victorian ballroom. But what makes this piece particularly interesting to a collector is its engineering. It is a true transformer. The tiara can be dismantled to be worn as a necklace, but it has another trick up its sleeve. The base of the tiara, the bandeau that sits against the hair, can be detached and worn separately. In a very forward-thinking design choice for the 1890s, this base converts into a choker necklace. It is a detail that makes the piece surprisingly versatile, allowing it to be styled in a way that feels quite modern even today. This versatility has clearly appealed to modern buyers. When the tiara was sold from Mary's estate in 2015, it fetched $850,000, doubling its estimate. But its story didn't end there. It reappeared at Christie's in Geneva in May 2023. In just 8 years, its value had climbed even higher, selling for over $1 million. Among the high-carat power pieces, there was a smaller item that reveals a more personal history. It is a ruby and diamond bracelet dating from the second half of the 19th century. The true value of this piece is recorded on its reverse, linking it to a specific family legacy. Sarah Cohen, who was Hannah de Rothschild's maternal grandmother, died in February 1879. In her last will, she bequeathed £1,000 to her granddaughter specifically for the purchase of a bracelet. This piece was commissioned to honor that request, and the central motif bears the inscription, "In memoriam, my beloved grandmother Sarah Cohen, died 12th February Y, 1879. It was also a piece designed with distinct practicality. The central ruby rosette is detachable, allowing it to be worn separately as a brooch or a pendant. In 1967, following the death of her mother, the Marchioness of Crewe, Mary inherited the 16th century estate of West Horsley Place. This 300-acre sanctuary in Surrey would become her home for nearly 50 years. In her decades of independence in London and Surrey, Mary maintained possession of her extensive jewelry collection. Among the pieces she had retained from her marriage was a magnificent suite of pearl and diamond jewelry created by Cartier. This suite was a wedding gift from her mother-in-law, the American heiress May Golette. It is striking for its unusual moody palette. The chandelier earrings, the double-clip brooch, and the necklace are set with natural pearls that range from light brownish gray to a deep grayish brown. It is a sophisticated, almost moody color scheme that suited Mary's elegant style perfectly. But what makes this suite particularly interesting is its life after Mary. While many antique jewels disappear into anonymous bank vaults after an auction, these pearls found a very public second life. If you follow modern high society fashion, you might actually recognize them. The Cartier pearl earrings and brooch were acquired at the 2015 auction by Annette de la Renta, the widow of the legendary fashion designer Oscar de la Renta. She has been photographed wearing Mary's pearls at high-profile events in New York, such as the Save Venice Gala and benefits at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. But the gifts from her mother-in-law didn't stop there. Mary Golette also gifted her a striking 6-strand pearl bracelet in 1935. This piece was pure Art Deco opulence, 6 rows of natural saltwater pearls held together by a geometric motif set with diamonds. It was a massive architectural jewel that perfectly captured the style of the 1930s. There is one final piece in Mary's collection that speaks to an even grander history. It is a large brooch known as one of the Pearls de la Couronne. This jewel originates from the French crown jewels, which were famously auctioned off by the French Republic in 1887 to prevent any future monarchy from reclaiming them. Mary's husband's grandfather, Ogden Golette, was one of the major buyers at that historic sale. He purchased this brooch, and it eventually passed down the line to Mary. We know she valued this piece highly because she chose to wear it for a formal portrait. And if you look closely at that same portrait, you will see she is wearing other significant treasures. Alongside the French brooch, she wears a natural pearl and diamond necklace and a pair of impressive late 19th century earrings. It was a look that combined the best of 3 centuries: French imperial history, Victorian elegance, and her own 20th century poise. Mary, Duchess of Roxburghe, passed away in 2014 at the age of 99. She had no children, and she left her entire estate to her grandnephew, the late Bamber Gascoigne. She endured the public breakdown of her marriage and the physical siege of her home with a dignified silence, never complaining publicly. In the end, her legacy secured the future of the place she loved most. When the hammer finally fell at Sotheby's in 2015, the auction of her personal property raised nearly £8.8 million. This fortune was dedicated entirely to the restoration of West Horsley Place, transforming the decaying mansion into a vibrant center for arts and opera. The jewels that once lay wrapped in newspaper in the darkness of the besieged castle ultimately provided the means to bring light and new life to her childhood home. It is a beautiful, almost poetic resolution to a dramatic life. Today, West Horsley Place is managed by the Mary Roxburghe Trust, continuing the legacy Bamber Gascoigne started when he chose to save the house instead of selling it. If you found this story as moving and fascinating as I did, please support this video with a like. It really means a lot. And do subscribe to the channel. We have many more untold stories of tiaras that have witnessed great dramas waiting to be shared. Thank you for spending this time with me.